Hello everyone, my name is Muir, and this is X4 Foundations. We're going to be covering all of the base weapons, called Commonwealth weapons for the most part, and the expansion weapons all together. I'm going to be using this guide, the X4 Ultimate Weapons Guide, that is currently up to 6.10. 6.20 is in beta right now, and this guide was created by Kajar, a very wonderful guy that I have met in this community. And yes, let's go ahead and get into it. So what Kajar has done, he has a lot of definitions that he has here, and he explains how he sort of derives information. And then we have the weapons themselves, and these weapons are explained rather nicely. As you can see, there are lots of raw numbers here. However, for the average user, lots and lots of numbers without some sort of chart aren't really all that useful. But before we get all to that, let's talk about when he's talking about burst versus sustain. We won't be taking into account overheat. So, burst means the weapon is fired until it overheats, and that's all that's measured. Sustained is the weapon is fired until it overheats, then completely discharges all its heat, and then fired until it overheats. So there's that to and fro that's kind of important there. But we have all these raw numbers. There's a different way that I like to do this. There we go. So, charts are fantastic. They actually help us in a lot of ways, and they can make it easy to visualize and understand information. What this chart doesn't tell you is how easy it is for a weapon to actually deliver this DPS. So that's something that's rather important to take into account. But alright, let's go through these. The dark blue is sustained, the light blue is burst, the dark brown is sustained, and the light brown is burst. The blues are for shields, and the browns are for hull damage. So let's go ahead and go through these really quick, and then we'll explain their strengths and weaknesses. So the Argon Ion Blasters, these guys do an outrageous amount of shield damage, but they barely do any hull damage. Like, they just tickle the enemy ships. The Beam Emitters, also the Argon Ion Blasters, they fire rather rapidly. I think it's like bam, 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 bam. And they are very effective at being able to hit enemy ships. The projectiles move very, very fast. But again, they're hyper-specialized on stripping shields, something you would use against capitals, essentially, when you want to strip them faster than the last mortars can do. Next up, we have the Beam Emitters. These are your classic lasers, you know, like a la Star Wars, where it's like a beam that's shooting something. And so the Beam Emitters, these guys are great to use on fighters that are anti-fighters. Keep in mind that when you are creating an anti-fighter ship, you actually want something that has a really high pitch when you are using combat engines. The reason for this is high pitch means they can turn around faster, and fighters typically rocket past each other and then spin around and do it again. So they kind of do this when they're fighting. So just keep that in mind. Now, what you also want to do with your small ships, especially if you're using beam emitters, is to put them into wings. So you want like 3, 4, 5 fighters per wing, and you just select 5 fighters that'll have, say, in this case, beam emitters, and you tell them to attack for commander, which is just, the commander is just one of the fighters. And so what that means is they will now all focus fire at the same target. So just one of those things that you can do that help you take out enemy fighters very quickly. So after that, we have the Blast Mortar. So these things are sort of like the small version of, are sort of like a better version of the plasma cannons. They deal more damage, they have higher sustained damage, and the projectiles move faster, but they have lesser range. That's the only real negative to them. Because the projectiles move faster, they do have a higher chance of hitting enemy fighters, but I wouldn't place a lot of... I wouldn't think of these as anti-fighter weapons. They are at least anti-corvette, and at best anti-large and extra-large weapons that you would use on your bombers, which you're going to put into fleets that are on the bombard command. After that, we have the bolt repeaters. These two guys, they do a pretty good job of what they do. Bolt repeaters, they fire in a somewhat contained cone in front of them, and what that results in is probably around half of their shots are going to miss if you're shooting at fighters, but somewhere in the vicinity of 80 to 90 to 100% of their shots will hit against corvettes, meaning that this is more of an anti-corvette weapon if you're not just trying to snipe them with blast mortars or space shotguns. We'll get to those later. But these guys, they do throw out a stream of bullets in front of them, and in some ways, if you can keep the enemy ship from recharging their shields, then you can win. But yeah, these are very much more aimed at anti-corvette than anti-fighter. After that, we have the Pyranid Burst Rays. So these are anti-module weapons. So what is a module? So large and extra large ships, they have turrets. They have turrets, engines, shield batteries, and then, well, module shield batteries, and then ship shield batteries. So each one of those represents a module, and you can destroy that module, which is really effective. So you would fly up and you would shoot the module directly, and it would do a bunch of extra damage to the module and blow it up. So these anti-module weapons, they do 700% damage to modules. Now, note this does not apply on small and medium ships. So I don't think you can shoot out their modules. So you couldn't, say, get behind or you can get behind a medium ship and then shoot at its engines and watch it just list and die. After that, we have the Pyranid Mass Drivers, and this is where we're actually going to start getting to the long cooldown weapons. This is our first introduction to them. Long CD means that this is 10 to 20 seconds in its cooldown. The only difference between Mass Driver Mark 1 and Mark 2 is... Oh, by the way, these guys, they are Commonwealth. That's just what I put in for meaning base game. But you get these from the Holy Order of the Pontifex, so the HOP. Okay, so, or the Ministry of Finance. Okay, so Mass Drivers. These guys, they do a lot of damage. Per shot, they deal 1,500 damage if they hit. The downside is that this one has a cooldown of 20 seconds, and this one has a cooldown of around 10 seconds. So, what that really translates to is when you shoot somebody with this, you will be able to shoot them again before their shields start to recharge. So you could, in theory, win a fighter battle with this. You can't with this one. Its cooldown is about 20 seconds, so their shields will probably fully recharge before you can fire again. However, these things have an outrageously long range, which means you could, in theory, sit outside of a station's range and just shoot the station with these if you really wanted to. So that is an option. It would probably take you absolutely forever to even damage the station. Reinforcements will show up and force you to leave long before. I don't know if your fighters would sit outside of that range and just shoot the station and instead of rushing in. I have a feeling they would just rush in. But it just is what it is. Alright, so the plasma cannons. These guys, they are basically what you use to target large and extra large ships with fighters if you don't have access to blast mortars. Their projectiles move slowly, but they have greater range than blast mortars. And they obviously deal less damage overall, unfortunately. Okay, so next we get on to pulse lasers. Pulse lasers are really great. So let's talk about these for a second and compare them to bolt repeaters, because these are the two weapons you're probably looking at. Bolt repeater shots, they move at about 1 kilometer a second. Pulse laser shots, they move at around 4.5 kilometers per second. What this means is if we're looking at fighters, these guys will have a hit rate of probably less than 50%. whereas these pulse lasers will have a hit rate of probably over 75%, maybe over 80%. So, if you don't want to use beam emitters, but you still want to have a high chance of hitting and killing enemy fighters, pulse lasers are your go-to in that regard. Pulse lasers do enough damage to where they can still threaten medium ships. Beam emitters, they tend to have problems with that. This is one of the reasons you have to put them into wings. Now, putting your ships in the wings is also a good idea with any kind of fighters, so you're not going to be losing anything by putting them into a wing of like 4 or 5 ships. 3 to 5 ships. Okay, so after that, we have the space shotguns over here. So, when I say space shotgun, I do actually mean space shotgun. They fire like a space shotgun that's mounted to your ship in front of them. And with the distances you're usually fighting at with fighters, these are fantastic, and they do a huge amount of damage, as reflected over here. And they do enough damage to where they can still decently threaten medium ships as well, so that is a consideration to keep in mind. They are legitimately dangerous to medium ships as well. After that, we have the Talati Muon Chargers. So, these are a sort of specialized type of weapon. What they do is they fire sticky projectiles, and these projectiles, one, you have to charge up the Muon Charger, and then you can fire it. And when you fire it, it fires 3 projectiles per Muon Charger, and those projectiles, if fully charged, have a % chance to stick to the enemy ship, stick to their shield, stick to their hull, and they will do damage over time, and you can just keep adding on more of these shots to get their full damage over time per shot. So that does mean that you'll likely have some bleed over damage where the ship was destroyed, and it's just doing additional damage to, an empty husk. But that's okay. If you want to use the Muon Charger for that, it is a weapon that deals... Well, it deals about the same sustain and the same burst damage, because it's almost impossible to overheat this thing. So that's the good part, because of its delay on when you can fire it. Because of its charge up. It's almost impossible to overload it. So it has higher sustained damage than the shard battery, but lower than the blast mortar. But again, you do have to charge it up and then fire, and then charge it up and then fire, which might be a bit much for most players. After that, we have the split weapons, and the split weapons are best described by take one aspect of a Commonwealth gun and ramp it up to 11, and there you go. So split weapons, they have the Boson Lance. This is essentially the Talati mass driver, yeah. So it has a shorter range, but a higher burst damage opportunity. So as you see over here with the mass driver, this one sort of comes to its max at around 150, and this guy's max is over 200. So they just do more damage, but they have shorter range, but they're still a sniper rifle. It's just a higher damaging sniper rifle with shorter range. Over here we have the I think that's supposed to be neutrino or neutron Gatling gun. And so what this thing does is it's very similar to the bolt repeaters, except it doesn't fire magazines of them, so it doesn't go blah 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 and then have to wait and then blah blah blah. This thing just fires until it overheats. So it's very much, essentially imagine big Vulcan cannons, where it just never runs out of ammunition. Now the thing is, where the bolt repeater has a cone of light, maybe this, the neutrino Gatling is more like this. So it's just going to shoot bullets everywhere in front of it. With that in mind, you can think of this just as like a big area of effect weapon. It just, bullets are going everywhere. So what this is, now the good part is, this has a much higher damage than the bolt repeater. This is at max, we'll say like 225, and this one is almost like 300 damage. So what you would want to do with the split neutrino Gatling is you want to get close enough to the enemy ship to where you can just unload and all the shots hit. But you do have to get closer. So think about this as if you're shooting at a fighter, probably like less than 25% of your shots are actually going to hit. Which can be useful. It will still chip away at the fighter, but it's very inaccurate, and as a result of that, it's more of an area of effect in front of it. Next, we have the Split Tau Accelerator. If I remember correctly... Oh, alright, where is it? Oh my... Okay, the Tau Accelerator. There are so many weapons we haven't fully used yet. The Tau Accelerator, it is a shard battery, that's right. This is the split super shotgun. So, if we look at the normal shard battery, we are looking at maxing out at below 500, and this one maxes out above 500. So what the Tau Accelerator does is it basically dumps its load of shotgun faster, and each round does more damage, but it overheats more quickly. That is the general idea here. So as Kajar is pointing out, faster rate of fire, slightly increased damage output, but shorter range, speed, and heat efficiency. It's extra bursty, which is really nice, so it can go in and be that weapon that you use to just blast something down and kill it very quickly, but you have to get much closer to the target than you did with the original shard battery. We have the Thermal Disintegrator. This is essentially the split version of the Muir charger. So the Split Disintegrator does more shield damage versus more hull damage, which the Muir, well, the Muir charge is equal possible. So almost 300, this one's less than that. Now this does extra shield damage than hull damage, and I believe there is a specific shtick to it. It increases the damage output and shield penetrating ability. Okay. So what this actually does is this penetrates shields, and it just does damage through the shields themselves, which is nice. Alright, that is the split weapons. What would I use these for? Neutron, Gatling, I'd probably use those on my anti-frigate ships. Their entire job would be to just like fly up and put all the DACA into the enemy ships. Or I'd use them as area of denial. I would use the Tau Accelerators to just fly up, also as anti-corvette, anti-small, medium ship, and they would fly up. They dump a whole lot of damage onto the enemy ship and then run away. These would also be the ships I'd probably want, also the weapons I might want to use against capitals, since they just do so much damage. But you do have to get close. With these, you don't have to get as close. So this might be a better way to go. But as you can see here, this one is also really nice. If you're shooting at capitals, this can be pretty solid. But alright, let's go into Terran weapons. Terran weapons, they don't have any special qualities that I can see where they do more hull damage than shield damage. The Meson Stream is essentially the mass driver, but it's like the super version of it. These guys do the most damage per hit, and the medium versions are outrageous. But we're only looking at small in this video, so that works. So these guys, yeah, these are your sniper rifles. They have pretty good range, they do high damage, and they also have, I believe, slightly shorter cooldowns than the mass driver. Next we have the Proton Barrage, and if I remember correctly, the Proton Barrage is the Terran version of the Bolt Repeater. So, they have decently high barrage, they have decently high burst, and if we compare those to the original Bolt Repeaters, these max out around 200, and the Terrans, they're maxing out around 300. So they are definitely an upgrade, but they are very expensive, and that's kind of the trend with a lot of Terran weapons, is that they are better than the Commonwealth weapons, but they're more expensive. Then we have the Terran Pulse Laser, which is a direct upgrade to the Commonwealth Pulse Laser down here. This maxes out at probably around 175, and over here it's maxing out at about 200. So it is a slight upgrade, but again, it'll be more expensive than the Commonwealth version. And this is also where we get to the first point about Terran ships and Terran weapons, is that Terran ships can only use Terran weapons. Terran weapons can only be used on Terran ships. Split weapons can be used by Commonwealth ships, and Commonwealth weapons can be used by split ships as well. So Terrans, this is what they've got for their small ships. Then we have the boron weapons, and these guys are, this is where things start to get interesting, and they are actually the reason things are split up like this. Because as we can see, there's actually a pretty wide variance in what they're able to do. So, what do these guys do? Well, the borons are a little interesting. As you can see, their damage is very specific, and for weapons, we have these two specialized weapons down here, and then a generalized weapon. And the anti-hull, the phase gun does not slow the enemy at all. The ion gatling does slow the enemy. It also fires very rapidly, and the arc gun also slows the enemy. So the arc gun fires like 1, 2, 3, 4. I think it's like 1, 2, 3, 4. Whereas the ion gatling is like 1, 2, 3, 4. Right. So the ion gatling is firing 4 shots. I think for every 4-ish shots for every like 2 shots here. Well, for every 1 shot of this one fires like 3, 4 shots, it seems. So that in this one, it slows the first shot. It slows the enemy by 3%. This one slows the enemy by, I believe, 6%. We can go over here and we can see for sure. So yeah, ion gatling slows it by 3%, and the arc gun slows it by 6%. Now this can, as far as I understand, this applies to the enemy's speed and going forward, strafing, as well as being able to maneuver themselves. So being able to pitch, yaw, and roll. So quite literally, if you can keep fire on an enemy for long enough with these weapons, they will stop, and they'll just sit there. So that's sort of how the boron work. Think about them as debuffing the enemy into submission and then killing them, which works pretty well. So we have this generalized weapon, we have specialized weapons. My go-to is to use one of each of the specialized weapons on some ships, but you might like using the generalized weapon. That is perfectly fine. That's just what these guys are. Alright everyone, that is all the small weapons. In the next video we will be going over the medium weapons so that this video is not an hour long. Alright, I'll see you guys then.